yeah, so buying farm direct, traveling as much to origin as we can, just trying to connect the consumer to the farmer and understanding that you're not just drinking a beverage that wakes you up in the morning, but more someone's livelihood, and trying to connect the dots from origin all the way to, our local community, to the consumers.
Hey there, Omaha. Welcome into another episode of Restaurant Hoppen. I'm your host, Dan Hoppen, and I will fully admit I am no expert when it comes to coffee. In fact, I don't even know the most about coffee in my own household. That would be my beautiful wife, Sarah, who is a coffee fanatic. But it's something that I'm very interested in, and the more coffee shop owners that I talk to, the more I realize there's a lot of similarities between coffee and food, and I want to start learning more and more about it, and I don't think that there are three better people to help me learn than the three that we have on our panel tonight. We've got Autumn Pruitt, whose concept, Hurrdat Coffee, just celebrated its 15th birthday this year.
She's got a learner's permit.
Yeah, wow, we're going to be driving next year. We've got Sheese, who is the genius behind Archetype Coffee, and has been competing at the World or U.S. Barista Championships and the World Barista Championships a couple times, and was a 2023 National U.S. Barista Champion. I totally butchered that, but he was the best barista in America in 2023. That's all you need to know.
He's very good.
Yes. And Abby McLeay, who she and her husband own Zen Coffee. They've got 4 locations, including one in Lincoln that's been open for about a year now. And they've got a bakery that's associated with it. Fantastic coffee there. Abby McLeay.
Thank you.
Okay, so because we've got multiple voices, especially for people who are listening to the audio version of this, I would love for each of you to introduce yourself and maybe give me 30 to 45 seconds on your concept and kind of what you think makes it unique in the Omaha space. We'll start with you, Abby.
I'm Abby McLeay. I own Zen Coffee Company. We have 4 locations, 3 in Omaha, 1 in Lincoln. Really the reason why I set out for this was I wanted to bridge the gap between the new specialty coffee concept with what Omaha knew and loved, which is now considered more of our corporate coffee, So we really took a spin on some of those drinks that everyone knows and loves, while also introducing new concepts of single origin coffees and just bringing some of that into Omaha. Since then, we've grown. We've introduced coffee flights, which really kind of took off for Zen and really is what we're known for. But deep down, it's really just about our community, sustainability, and just kind of being a part of the big picture.
Hey, my name is Sheese. I own Archetype Coffee. Just next month, we'll be turning 11, which is pretty big. We have 3 locations across Omaha. I think what we specialize in, even from the beginning, is just like trying to showcase world-renowned coffees. So buying farm direct, traveling as much to origin as we can, just trying to connect the consumer to the farmer and understanding that you're not just drinking a beverage that wakes you up in the morning, but more someone's livelihood, and trying to connect the dots from origin all the way to, our local community, to the consumers.
That's great. I'm Autumn Pruitt. I own Hurrdat Sports Company with my husband, Luke. We actually started the bakery piece of our business first. And so I was very young and very naive and got into that, was subleasing from what was then Aroma's Coffee House down in the Old Market, and had the opportunity to buy the coffee shop as well. And so what started as something that I felt confident in has become something that I have kept learning as I go. And so purchased the coffee shop, opened a second location. We started roasting under the brand Hurrdat Coffee Company in 2015, and have just continued to learn more about this beautiful industry as we've gone. And so I would say if we were going to specialize in anything, it would be, trying to make a product that's excellent, local, and approachable. These are things that we talk about all the time. So it's got to be really good, but we want to make it so that people feel at ease when they drink it or when they eat it for the first time. And then we love connecting with our neighbors.
What draws you guys to coffee? It's one thing to drink it and one thing to love it. It's another to make it your profession. What what's that pull to you?
I mean, for me personally, it's like there are very few industries that I think that you can affect change, locally, nationally, and globally. And coffee is one of those rare, I think, ingredients, commodities, and beverage that you can actually do that, And so, like for Archetype, being able to build a community, being able to, treat not only our customers, but our employees a certain way, and then, like to be able to compete on a national level, and then to be able to, travel to origin and pay, farmers what they're worth, And so like for me, it was like there are very few industries that I think you can connect all of those and make a positive difference on every level.
Yeah, that's so
we
good.
talk a lot about how we just don't want to trip over the finish line. Like there's people on the other side of the world that started this entire crop. And so you get to work with the producers on the other side of the world. And to get that to Omaha, Nebraska, where we roast it and then brew it and then serve it, you just want to make sure that you do everybody in that supply chain justice. And there's not very many industries where it feels like the more you learn about it, the more you realize there is to learn.
Yeah, it really is all about just the connections all the way down the line. I think all of us talk about farm to cup and just every interaction between that, all the way from, the farmers to the person you're handing the coffee to. And it's just so important. It's cool to be just in between all of that.
What is that feeling like, just to have that knowledge that there's some tiny farm in Colombia or Peru or wherever it is, and you're taking a product from them and serving it to someone tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of miles away in Omaha, Nebraska? Like, there's no other way those two people or those two communities would be bridged, but coffee's the bridge, and you guys are providing that. Well, like when you think about that, what emotions do you have?
I mean, visiting farmers and shaking their hand and meeting them, like, I think it kind of changes your life, like when you're invited into someone's home, and almost all the farmers that we've ever visited, it's like the first thing that they do is like we sit at their table, and like we usually it's like they bring out hot chocolate and some pastries, and we just talk, and then they share kind of like their heart of like what they're doing. And so it's like when you go to those areas and you meet those people, I think it absolutely changed me. Like that was like the first time I was like, I think I could do this the rest of my life, like being able to encounter that and have those relationships. And so just wanting, just like Autumn said, to honor it. You don't want to trip over the finish line. You don't want to like see this labor of love that these producers have poured their entire life in. And by the time we get it to us, obviously like roasting it, and then even to a barista, it's like you want to make sure that every step of the way that you're honoring that relationship, and their craft is like what they do. We can't do what we do without them. And so just being able to honor it all the way to the end is huge.
And they're so grateful too. I mean, a lot of these farms, it's family business, and so it'll be passed down through generations, and just being able to even meet like the children who are coming in and learning, and just knowing how grateful they are and how much it means to them is just so important to what we do as well.
Now, I'm so curious on how you guys source beans, because, and this is a limited list, but just going through some of your menus right now, there are beans from Brazil and Guatemala and Ecuador and Rwanda and Peru. And I read these and I'm just like, how are you guys finding these? Like, how are you identifying this little farm in Venezuela and saying, yes, they're awesome beans here. I'm going to go visit them, and I'm going to go see them and meet their children. Like, how do you even find these different coffee farms?
Yeah, I would say that part of running a successful business is knowing what we're not good at. And so I think that we are not just scouring the internet trying to find every small farm on the other side of the world. Like, we work with really great importers and partners who are doing that work, who are boots on the ground in all of these countries and working directly with farmers. And then they can work to make sure that we are sampling some of the best coffees from around the world, and then they can help make sure that those imports are happening smoothly. I think this conversation is really interesting happening now in light of all of the tariffs that were announced last week, in light of all things global economy right now, because I just don't think anything cuts through that noise like a story. And I think like you can talk about computer parts, you can talk about automotives, you can talk about all of these things that just feel like things, But when you start talking about the people that you're working with on the other side of the world and adding a 10, 25, 43% tariff onto that, that's a pretty different conversation.
Well, real quick, I don't want to make this political. That's not what this podcast or anything is about. But just kind of, if you guys could touch on the realities of how that's going to affect your business, how that's going to affect the farms as well. What does that look like?
I think it's going to be expensive. Yeah. And I don't know that how any small farm or small business is able to move forward without that affecting both of our prices.
I mean, the reality of things is that coffee has been undervalued for so many years. And so most people don't realize that coffee is a commodity, so you can buy it on the C market. You know, it's traded just like any other commodity is. And so for most of all of, you know, my career in coffee, you know, like the C market's been down in $2 for years and years and years and years. Well, if a farmer makes $2 a pound of coffee, that's for a lot of farmers is not enough money to actually pay for all the costs of what it takes to grow coffee. And so you see in countries like Ethiopia where they're pulling up all the coffee and they're starting to plant chat, which is like a small like narcotic, or they'll pull it up and they'll plant sugar, you know, because coffee is ultimately just a crop, you know, and so. For them, if they're not making a livable wage, if they can't pay for their family, then what are they going to do? They're going to go do something else. And so now the C market, because of lots of different variables that we could talk about hours for, but Brazil, they're one of the largest producers. If something happens to their production that year, maybe they get a late frost, then what happens is they're not producing enough coffee, and so it drives the C market up. And so that is one variable that's happened. And so the C market hit, and $4. So, let's just say like normally you pay $3 a pound of coffee, and now all of a sudden it's $4 just for like a base commodity coffee. We're not even talking about specialty coffee. Well, you can imagine what the coffee price is for specialty coffee. So we had some of our coffees, in just a matter of months, go from let's just say $4 to $6. And so if anyone, you don't have to know economics, that's like a huge jump per pound, what we have to pay. And so it's like, what do you do with that? How do you pass it on? And, what are you going to do with it? So we could talk about tariffs and the C market for a long time, but it's been undervalued. And now farmers are actually starting to be able to make a little bit more of what they've deserved this whole time. But it's definitely a tricky thing that we all have to navigate. And obviously the consumer as well.
But I think it's interesting. So over the last couple of months, we've tasted some really bad coffee in the effort to try and find something that is on the lower end of specialty coffee pricing. And the reality is it's just such an interesting relationship of price to quality, where you can get a coffee that's not much less expensive that is terrible. It tastes like paint thinner. And you say man, at some point, it's just not worth it to have such a bad product. And so what we've decided is that we're going to continue to have great relationships with the farmers we worked with before, that we're going to continue to bring in that coffee and figure out what the price point is that makes sense for both of us, and hopefully bring Omaha along for that ride with us, continue to provide value at the register too.
I didn't expect to get a reference to paint thinner on the podcast tonight. So we're
it's
already
on the flavor wheel. It's over by
defects.
Yeah.
We're already going to great places. I'm going to pull us back away from tariffs and things that no one wants to talk about, and we're going to focus on.
Jumped into the deep end.
No, this is my fault. We're going to talk about positive things, and I think all three of you, definitely you two so far, have mentioned the word community, and I think that. Even more than restaurants, for whatever reason, there's something about coffee houses and the way that they create community. For you guys, what makes that connection between coffee house and community?
I mean, in history books, that's wars were planned in coffee houses. I mean, I always call it the unbar. It's we talk about first place, second place, and third place. First place, your home, and then work, and then you want to be the coffee house to be that community place, and it's not alcohol, so it's everyone's completely with it when they're in that space, and so it's where do you go in the morning, in the mid-afternoon? It's like, where do you go? Like coffee houses. And it's a place where people can connect. They can have meetings. It's just a beautiful thing. And it's been that way from century to century to century to century,
Yeah. We had one location that didn't make it. We opened a location at Flagship Commons at Westroads Mall. This was the year that my son was born, so it was 2016. It was a big year, but it was a location where, like, on paper, everything about it made sense. It was like great partners there, beautiful architecture, great design, but we didn't have regulars. It was a situation where the people that came twice a year to buy shoes, and so you would it was so transactional, and there was no sense of community there. And I think that no matter how hard we tried, we just couldn't make that space feel like us. And so instead, we said, thank you so much for the opportunity, and we put a spot in North Omaha instead. And that is different. We see people that come every single day, sometimes multiple times a day at our other shops, and you get the opportunity to actually get to know your customers and get to know your team in a way that you don't always get to even at a restaurant, because it's more expensive. And so you might not go out to eat every day of the week, but people might come get coffee every day.
No, absolutely.
It really is about the regular. I love that you made that point, just because there are so many people just kind of at the base of probably all of our companies who we see every day and know everything about, and know about our kids and our lives and everything that we're doing. It's also so interesting, though, because you watch the people in your stores meet each other. They start realizing, like, oh, I see you every day. Why don't we get to know each other? And then they become friends. And I just think it's so cool how our spaces bring the most unlikely relationships and people together. And I think that's just so neat.
I think coffee being one of the last affordable luxuries, it's a cool thing, So whether you're a student or whether, one of the highest paying executives, like, everyone can come and meet at that table. And I think that's it. It breaks down all of those barriers. It's like it's a small barrier of entry. We can still sell a cup of coffee for $3, right now. But you know what I mean? Like, a student can afford it, or an executive. And so, like, when everyone's standing at the bar, it's easy to be like, hey, this is Autumn. Hey, have you met Dan? Like, hey, you guys should meet, and like, it's easy to make those connections. And it's just kind of cool to see those barriers broken down of, like, socioeconomic status and those things. And it's just like, it's just about this drink. It's just about the beauty of this cup that, brings everyone together. And I think it's pretty incredible.
This next question is one that could bridge off in one of two directions. I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to choose your own adventure. Yes. So what are some trends in coffee right now that either have you really excited and you're interested in seeing where they go, or some trends or a trend that just really annoys you and you're just like, oh, everybody wants this, or I'm not interested in that. Why does everyone ask about that? Either way you want to take it, the floor is yours.
Cold foam.
Yeah!
Love it or hate it.
Love or hate it.
You just high-fived and you might be on opposite sides.
Yeah, I know. We might have to take that high five back.
I don't know. I would love to be able to sell that. When you're like 10 cold foams deep and you're just leading into a rush and it's going to be endless. Yeah, I could leave it.
As someone who knows nothing, I'm guessing cold foam is difficult. Like, that's a labor-intensive process?
Yeah, there's some steps. It's more that people really want, like, a different flavor for every single, if you could just do one, it'd be fine. But it's, they want a different one for every single drink, and so you have to clean it out. You have to whip it. Yeah. It's a process.
Anything to add on that, Isaiah?
No. I've never made cold foam, so I'm good. No, I was gonna say, for me, co-ferment coffees. I don't know if you guys have had them or not, but when you pick cherries and you have to process the coffee. Typically it's been like washed. Honey's a natural process, and then there's like anaerobic coffees, and then carbonic macerated coffees. Well, now some farms are doing co-fermented coffees where they're fermenting the cherries with like fruit and some like cinnamon and some like different flavors that completely transforms the coffee. So I'd say that's like one of the biggest hot buttons in our industry right now, especially like on competition side, because if you're co-fermenting this coffee with strawberries, what's it going to taste like? Strawberries.
Oh,
strawberries. Exactly. No, and so like a lot of like our industry is like hugely split of like, do you do these or do you not do these? You know, like, is it bastardizing the coffee? Is it taking this pure, beautiful thing that has, flavors that comes from the terroir to the processing to the variety, and now you're flavoring it? And so it's kind of like a hot button topic.
Yeah, but where do you land? Say it into the microphone. It's on the record for all of time.
You can never change your opinion on this.
That's heavy. So for me, I think Archetype likes to be flavor makers, and so I think there are quality in every different type of process. And so for us, it's like finding what's actually being done really well and executed at a high level. And, over the last year, I've probably tasted 100 of them. And I would say out of the 100, 5 are good. And out of that 5, 3 are excellent. And so for us, like, it's about, being able to bring something to the table that is at that level, that quality level. But it also means you have to drink a lot of coffee that tastes really terrible and tastes like markers smell sometimes, or like...
We had a grape one last week, and it
it's
tasted
gnarly.
like straight Fanta. I mean, it was like...
Yeah, sometimes they're good,
bonkers.
and sometimes they're just not good at all. Some of them...
But that being said, I think it's super interesting that we're just trying something new in processing. That
Sure.
I think, I appreciate that the producers are pushing the edge of what's been done before, because at some point that scale will tip to say like, okay, now there's more than 3 excellent ones.
Yeah.
But you got to have a lot of really bad ones first to be able to make something new.
What's your hot button?
I'll take yours. No, I was going to say processing. I honestly was. I wasn't going to go quite as nerdy as you on like that specific processing method, but I think that it's been really fun to see how just the way that processing is the way that the coffee cherry is taken off of the coffee beans at origin. And so when it's harvested by hand, and typically that happens in 3 or 4 passes in a season. And so when the coffee cherries are ripe, those are harvested, and then they have to decide how to get the coffee cherry off of the coffee bean. And typically that's done in a handful of different ways. A wash process, for all intents and purposes, that's like power washed and then dried on a patio. Feel free to correct me at any point in the process.
Yeah, you're doing great.
Natural process, you're going to leave that coffee cherry on for a controlled amount of time, and some of those juices actually absorb into the coffee bean. And then there's 27 different processing methods in between those. And so there's black honey and white honey and red honey and co-ferments and lots of different ways that the farmers are trying to decide how to take the coffee cherry off of the coffee seed. And I think that because they're experimenting with all these different ideas, then we get really interesting coffees from places that, like, just washed coffee from Brazil is never going to be wildly interesting. But if you are able to process it in these different ways, you get some really interesting flavors that might not be there otherwise. And I think that that's fun.
Yeah. I think the only problem for me with all of it is I think that our industry is far outpacing our consumers. Mm-hmm. And like, I have baristas that are not even up to speed just because things are happening so quickly, which is cool to see. But I think all of us in the industry have to work better with our consumer base to be able to pass along that information in a way that's interesting to them, and not just like trying to shove more information down people's throats, because no one wants that.
Or we just let people decide if they like it.
Yeah.
I don't know that there always has to be a lecture with it. I think you get to say, what do you think about this?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you either like it or you don't. And if you want to learn more, then come along for the journey. But,
if it tastes good, it is good.
Yeah.
I think I learned more about coffee in those 4 minutes than I did in like the first 30 years of my life before I started doing this podcast. That was incredible. Great answers. Isaiah, I found a quote from you from a couple years ago where
See, on the record forever.
I know.
Where you said coffee is like a recipe. And the more that I thought about it, the more that I was like, wow, that's really interesting. I've never thought of it that way, but it's so true. I would just love for you to expand upon that. What do you mean by coffee is like a recipe?
So, I mean, just from like the basics of it, you have a certain amount of water, certain temperature, certain grind size, certain water contact time, turbulence. So like that's just the basics of brewing a cup of coffee. which isn't kind of that basic. But then, I mean, like even like the soil makeup, like how the farmers are, what they're feeding the soil that goes to the cherry, so that's a recipe. And then how they process the coffee, that's a recipe. How they dry the coffee, that's a recipe. How they mill the coffee, that's a recipe. And then, down to the basics of like water, like for competition, like we're always messing with water where like we start with distilled water and then we're adding all types of different minerals to it to express different aspects of the coffee, which is insane. I could have one coffee and have 4 different waters and you'd have 4 very different expressions, and one might be insane and one might like not even taste like the coffee at all. And so that's why we say coffee is a recipe from every aspect of it, and so it's this very complex thing, but if you want to yield the same results time and time and time again, you have to have a set recipe so that you can repeat that, which they can speak to that much better than I can as far as like on baking side of things. And like, if you want to scale up or whatever, you have to be able to have a recipe that's repeatable. And so, yeah, you need that recipe.
Yeah, so both Zen and Hardy, obviously Hardy started as a bakery. Zen, you do all your baked goods as well. So I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts as people who work with coffee as a recipe and people who work with food as a recipe. What does that analogy spark in your mind? How are the two things similar and different?
Go for it.
I think you just have more ingredients in the kitchen. And so like with coffee, I mean, you mentioned it, so many of those, but at the base level, you have water and you have coffee. And then you find different temperatures that you use to extract the flavors in different ways. In the kitchen, like the possibilities are endless depending on what ingredients you want to bring in. And sometimes that's great. And sometimes you get into trouble if you're overly ambitious and you try to make everything. And so I may be speaking from experience. And so it's been a pretty interesting process in the last few years to really work to scale back our bakery to say, how do we make sure that the things we're making are consistent, are excellent, that they align with who we are now, not necessarily who we were when we started. And sometimes that means telling customers, I'm so sorry, we don't do that anymore, and that hurts me. But I think that ultimately it's been really good for our business to figure out how to say, I'm so sorry, that's not something that we do. Can I connect you to somebody in town who would do a great job with that? And so I really went off of your question there, but I think that it's an interesting thing to say, like, it's not just about the industry and it's not just about the small business, but it's like, how do we create things that will be here for the long haul? And what I've discovered is most of the time it's saying no more often than you want to. Even if it's to cold phone, Abby, like if this is your thing, you say, you get one flavor, you get vanilla, ma'am.
I think also in baking, especially when you are scaling those recipes, that can also get really tricky because, when you're adding, that can definitely change what you're making, what you're able to do. And a lot of what you said, it's sometimes like you just have to kind of press the brakes. Maybe it is something, we sell scones and we sell out of them every weekend. And it's like, why don't you have more? Why don't you have more? And, at some point you have to you're like, we can only do so much, try something a little bit different. And Pop-Tarts, they're gone instantly. And it's great, but sometimes too much of a great thing isn't so great anymore. And so I think it's just figuring out what we can do and continuing with that consistency.
I want to talk about cupping. This is something that
You did say this was going to be X-rated.
Yeah. We're not going in that direction. I had no idea what cupping was until I visited a local roaster last week, and it was kind of an eye-opening experience and honestly really fun.
You really need to get to the point of what cupping is before you keep
your hand out of the gutter. Come on, this is a coffee podcast. There are children here. In terms of coffee,
yes,
and tasting different coffees in a quick succession, there's the word. What is cupping, and why is that a great way to taste coffee?
It's the only standardized way that everyone tastes coffee across the world, and so it's stripped down to the most bare bones, where you have one little cup, and you put 10.5 grams in it. You grind it. You smell it first for for the dry fragrance, and then you pour water on it, and then you smell it for the wet aroma. You break the crust, scoop it off, and then you just slurp really obnoxiously. So it sprays all over your tongue. It's just like the most bare bones way of tasting coffee. So whether you're in Omaha, Nebraska with our friends kicking it here, or if you're in Africa, everyone's going to taste coffee the exact same way. And so I think everyone always wants to cup coffees because they think it's fun, and it is a fun experience, but it is a learned skill because most people aren't used to slurping this beverage. We're used to drinking it and savoring it, and so it's a cool thing, but it's also a skill. And when you're at Origin and you're tasting literally over 100 coffees in a day, you better know how to taste it really quickly, get that flavor, and move on to the next cup, because otherwise you're going to be super jacked.
Yeah, take your spit cup with you.
Spit.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was at this roaster last week, and he was demonstrating how I was supposed to do it, and he aggressively sucked it in. I was like, I don't even know if I can do that.
Were you with Nick at Sodality? Is this what was happening?
Yes.
Okay, so Nick was our roaster for 8 years. He taught me also how to do aggressive cupping. But it was
Autumn, you're going to get us the explicit rating on this podcast, the first episode ever of Restaurant Hoppen.
All of that to say, you feel so pretentious the first time that you do it,
Right.
and you also usually just choke a little bit because you're not good at it yet. But I think that it's an interesting way to taste coffee, and nothing can hide. Like, it's one of those things where it feels important when you're just learning a new skill, but when you're getting ready to put thousands of dollars on a small sample of green coffee based on what you taste in one tiny cup, you better be paying attention. And so it's like an interesting way to taste coffee, but it's super valuable.
We should add that your last remarks when you're cupping is when the coffee's at room temperature. And the reason why is because your tongue's a muscle. And so people are like, I don't like cold coffee. It's not that you don't like cold coffee. It's that you actually don't like coffee that tastes bad. And so that's the reason why you have Starbucks and McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts, that they serve the coffee so piping hot, is because your tongue can't taste any defects. And so it's just like when people are like, I don't like warm beer. Well, if your beer tastes bad warm, then it still tasted bad when it was cold. Your tongue can't taste that cold temperature, just like it can't taste hot temperature. So when you're cupping, at the end, you can actually taste some defects when it's at room temperature. And then on your cupping score, you can dock it 10 points, which is a lot on the cupping score. And so that's the reason why when you're cupping, you want to make sure that you taste it hot all the way to cool so that you don't miss any of those things. So when we're writing those fat, nasty checks for coffee, thousands of dollars, for one Origin, you better know whether that cup is good, hot, all the way to cold.
I don't feel like I really appreciated that till I had kids, and then I stopped having hot coffee at home. It was like always just like random mugs laying around the house. I was like, oh, there's that note. There's a little raspberry. So.
That's fascinating. I'd never heard that before, the whole hot-cold thing.
Yeah.
Oh. So drink lukewarm coffee. Let's make sure it's out of
Make
it.
sure it's good at lukewarm.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
don't.
We
I'm
all
just
have our preferences, but even still with beer, that's why if warm beer tastes bad, it's bad beer.
Okay. Fair enough. I want to talk a little bit about being business owners and starting your businesses. So I've got a couple quotes from you guys. The first one's from Isaiah, and
I didn't say it.
You did. It's online. You said it.
Okay.
You said, I opened Archetype because I wanted to make coffee and be a part of community and those things. And then all of a sudden you have to have a brand and you have to start making T-shirts and hats. And now you need a website and now you need to have Instagram and all the things. And so I think, being very naive, I wasn't thinking about those things. What was it like for you guys to move from just being a coffee shop lover or a bakery lover to being a business owner? What was that transition like?
Steep learning curves for me. I don't know about these two, but yeah. I mean, I didn't go to school for business.
I did, but it doesn't mean you actually know how to do anything in the real life. I mean,
it's all like, once you're in it, I mean, anything can happen. And so I think that it doesn't matter what you've learned or even, how much history you have in coffee shops. Once you have your own and it's in front of you and you're like, oh, I make all of these decisions now for all of these people and they rely on me. It definitely changes the game, when you're not doing that for, a corporate company. You're doing that for yourself, and you make those choices. But
I think it matters a ton. So we are a wholesale coffee roaster, so we provide coffee to a lot of other shops and restaurants and offices. And there's such a marked difference between people that would like to have a coffee shop and people that work inside of a coffee shop. And I think that if you can be a business owner that is truly working alongside your people, where you're in it with them and you get to spend all sorts of quality time learning the good, the bad, and the ugly of your shop, then you make decisions differently than if you're only looking at the P&L.
Yeah, there's lots of steep learning curves of just like, I didn't even know what a P&L was. I had to...
What is a P&L?
Profit and loss.
There you go.
Ooh, look at him now.
Your ROI, what's your return on investment? I mean, like all those things, it's like ultimately, yes, I wanted to open a coffee shop because I'm passionate about coffee and I love community. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if, Archetype isn't making money, then Archetype isn't going to continue to be a business. And so... I think everyone loves the lure of like how fun coffee shops look and this is so cool. But like, I would say, we turn 11 next month and I would say the last 5 years has been harder than the first 6 years, going through the pandemic and how that changed things and the dynamics of it and just how, even with everything that's happening with, social media and those things, trends happen so much faster. Like staying on top of those things has just gotten harder and harder and harder. The cost of goods have gone up and up and up. And so for me, it's like a never ending learning curve that you just have to constantly adjust to and like what consumers want, cold foam, I think the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts and those big brands, they have millions of customers. Like how many customers do you have and you have and I have? We don't even have anywhere close to any of that. So who is shaping that culture? So it's like, I'm not saying it's a culture war, but like, people go to those places because they see them everywhere. And then when they come to us, they expect the same thing. And so it's just like a constant like learning of like what trends do you want to chase and what aligns with your goals as a brand and what do you not want to do. And I think for all of us it hits us all differently and it's just a never ending learning cycle, which is good and tiring in times.
Well, okay, how do you draw those lines then when a trend comes along and you're like, this could be good for us, maybe it'll make us more money, but it'll be very labor intensive and it might kind of get away from our core values and what we are as a coffee shop. Like I would never think of Archetype as a place that, is going to be super frou-frou coffees with cold foams and all that stuff. Nothing against places that offer that thing, but that's not your personality as a brand. So as you guys as business owners, how do you, whether it's baked goods or coffee itself, how do you find that line where you're like, the consumers are demanding this, or this is really popular in social media, we should go for it and we should try that, versus saying, no, this is who we are. We're not going to move off this. This is a tentpole part of our business.
I could say, so as a company that chased a trend of coffee flights and really took off with that.
That's a good pun.
I did not mean that at all either. Okay, so
that was good. I was super slow.
I didn't. It just came out. We had tried so hard to go in this direction of being more specialty, and it was post-pandemic. I was like, this is a really cool idea. It could kind of bring us back. I thought maybe it'd be a short-term thing, and it's been something that we've been writing out, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful for our business. But in the grand scheme of things and what I had envisioned for Zen and who we were, that definitely wasn't it. We have to create menus based off of what we can offer in a flight. A lot of times it is kind of what we were talking about, what Starbucks and Dunkin' rolls out, and keeping up with those trends, it can be very exhausting. It is something where it's very labor intensive that we always have to think about with our staff. Who can we put on during these hours to be able to keep up with the many orders with that? I am very cautious now with what trends I follow because of that. It's a lot of work to keep up with. It's a wonderful thing, and it can be really great for business, but it did change a little bit of who we were and maybe the direction that we wanted to go with. And so I think about that a lot more now.
one of my business mantras. It started really during the pandemic was don't create a monster you don't want to feed. And so I've stuck to my guns on that. But like during the pandemic, customers were just allowed to take things to go. And so we started doing gallon jugs, of like lattes and those things. But like once the pandemic was done, I was like, we're done with this. Because like keeping up with that production, we weren't really set up to scale that up at the time. And so like for me, it's like people are like, bring back the gallon jugs. But I'm like, it was so much work, And so it's like for me with trends and those things, it's like don't start a monster you don't want to feed and continue, because then you're locked into it. And it's hard, like even though I only have 3 locations, you guys have more, like it's a machine at this point. It's like you can't just pivot and it's like, we're not doing that anymore. We're going this way.
Yep.
Because it's a big machine that you've started. And so like for me, it's like you need to make smart decisions and kind of like think through the journey of like, okay, if we do this now, where's this going to be in a year or 2 years? And am I willing to make the sacrifices, or will it actually benefit me or not? So like don't start a monster you don't want to feed, guys.
Yeah.
Anything to add to that, Autumn? I mean, they gave great answers. If you have anything to add,
No,
great.
I think that's great.
Okay.
I think maybe a trend that I was not up for that now is a 4th location of ours is a drive-through, which I think that for the longest time I thought like, that's not us, that's not us, that's not us. That was the same location. It's the same office that had reached out to us multiple times. It used to be a bank. They already had like the infrastructure for a drive-through. They'd been reached out to by a local larger competitor, and they said, no, we want to hold out for local. And so they kept approaching us. And then in 2020, we thought, that could be us. And I think that for me, it wasn't that I was wrong before and then I was right. It was that it was worth looking at again. And so I think for us, it was to say, like, is it all about like the experience of sitting down and having the mug and sitting in a coffee shop? Or is there something about this beverage that transcends space, that is about like a daily ritual and rhythm that can also happen in a car somewhere, that can also happen on your way? And I think that for us, it was in the pandemic that we discovered this monster, but we decided to put a leash on it, give it a name, to take it home, to house train it. And I think that it's been a monster that's been good for us. I think it helped refine a ton of our processes. I think that we were able to follow where our customers were at. So somehow on every podcast we get into the pandemic because it was such a pivotal time in the restaurant and beverage industry. So we're 5 years past it, but it's still like changing the way that we do business. But it was the opportunity to say like, okay, maybe it's not just about this. It could also be about that. And so we made that switch, and it's been good for us. And hopefully it's been the only reason it's good for us is because it's also good for our customers. Mm-hmm. If they didn't support it, it wouldn't work. Yeah. So
it's good.
Isaiah, I'm interested in something you kind of touched upon there. You mentioned expanding to multiple locations and how you have to think of the ripple effects that it's going to have at each of those. And I wanted to ask you guys, because you've all expanded to 3-4 locations now. And I think a lot of people have this image in there, like this idyllic image of like opening a coffee house, maybe with their spouse, maybe with their best friend, and it's just a quaint little place, and they've got their regulars, and it's basically like Gilmore Girls but real life. And the reality is that's not what it's like for most coffee shops at all, and it certainly changes a lot when you add multiple locations into it. What was the biggest step, or maybe the biggest thing you had to learn moving from 1 location to 2 and then 2 to 3 and so on?
I think opening a second location is actually the hardest. I think that is the moment you realize you can't be 2 places at once. That's the moment when like you personally can't solve every problem. And up until that point, I did. It was like you could just live at the place and you could work all the time and you could be there. And so making the conscious decision to delegate, making the decision to document your processes, making the decision to set a clear expectation and then have consistent follow-up, like that's hard. And most of the time people don't do that. And so you just stick with 1 location. And so there's times where we dream about going back to 1 shop, but we also have a fantastic team that makes it possible. And so sometimes people ask like, don't you miss when it was just you? The answer is no. Like that was harder. It's so much better to do it with people, to do it with our people.
I had a business mentor once said, when I was opening the second location, he's like, you know what they say? He's like, the first is the hardest. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, the second, it's just as hard as the first one. And I was like, no one told me that, like it was supposed to be easier to scale up, but like it really isn't. That second one, and the other, I think the reality of it is the second one can sink the first one, and the third one can anchor the second and first one. And another business mentor was like, hey, we had 15 locations and 13 of them were doing incredible. And he said those last two, he's like, they weren't doing well at all. And those two anchored the whole ship, and so like for me, it was just like being cognizant of like growing smart and not growing just for growth. And quality control, like how do you have quality control across every one of those locations? And, once again, it's like when, you see Archetype on a cup, people have an expectation, whether it's at the Blackstone, the original location, or the second one or the third one. And if that expectation isn't met, that's a disappointment, and enough disappointments, then customers won't start coming back, And so like, for me, it was like growing smart. And like Autumn said, it's like, if you don't put those systems in place, like there's no way that you can grow and continue to like maintain. Will I go back to one location? Maybe, but, no, I mean, like doing it with the team is incredible, and it poses different challenges, but it also has a lot of different rewards as well.
Definitely with growing smart as well. And even just your point on, if one location serves something differently. And that's, I think, the hardest thing is having consistency, serving the same product, serving the same experience to your customers that you would give, and having that trust also in your teams to be able to do that. For me, it was actually our drive-through. That was the hardest. That was our third expanding into. For our second, we were mid-pandemic in downtown Omaha. Everyone was living out west. And so we were like, get us out there however we can get there. We need to like reach these people and just stay alive. But going into the third, I think, was the hardest. And I think a lot of it has to do with the different concept. There's not as much personal engagement with a 30-second ordeal at a window. And so you really have just that brief time to make a difference with that cup of coffee that you're giving to them. And if it's wrong, that comes back to the whole business.
So for you two specifically, with the drive-thrus, how do you, obviously it's not going to be the same if somebody comes into your coffee shop, they go up to they spend 5 minutes waiting in line, they get a chance to speak to the barista, they wait for their coffee, they get their coffee, they spend an hour hanging out with friends or working on their computer or whatever, and then they leave. You get all kinds of touch points and time with them, a chance to build a relationship. Even if they're sitting there and you're not talking to them, if they're enjoying the space, they're building a positive relationship with your shop. You have to, with a drive-through, you have to find a way to take all that and compress it into like a maybe 90-second interaction. How do you do that? Obviously, it looks very, very different, but how do you try and give people the same vibes and build that brand love in such a condensed opportunity?
I mean, I think consistency in product is obviously really important. That, they're going to remember a few things. It's going to be how they were treated at the window. Were they greeted? Was there a smile? How are you? How's your day? I like to engage as much as I can in that time. There's a lot of people who will still do the same, where you'll meet their dog, you will know their kids and their spouse, and they'll sit and chat. And you have to learn how to kind of like, okay, keep it on. But at the same time, also being able to deliver that same product in sometimes what I feel like is a shorter time. You can't sit there and do latte art, and you kind of have to, make sure same out. They're going to remember that, because they will be sipping on it. They'll get back to their office and they'll be like, man, that's really good. That was a really great experience. I want to go back. And that can also be so opposite, if you're grumpy, if there's even one little hint of, just like maybe something was a little off, maybe they don't come back, and you get just those brief seconds it's make or break.
Yep. I agree with all of those things. I think it's
Concur.
yeah, the quality. I would also just say, man, our team does such a great job, and so the number of reviews that we get where people are just blown away by the quality of customer service at our drive-through is, I think, a testament to our team, and also just a testament to like the lack of customer service at so many drive-throughs. And so I think that it's the opportunity to extend that same level of service, but just through a smaller window and a smaller window of time. But yeah, quality of product goes a long way. And I think that then what you might miss out on in like the duration of a visit to a coffee shop, you tend to make up for with like frequency of visits at a drive-through. So you have shorter amounts of time together, but you see people more frequently.
Okay. I want to go back to the concept of starting coffee shops and moving from someone who enjoys coffee to someone whose coffee is now life. Autumn, I found a quote from you from a couple years ago. You said, "I'm a business leader because I've been leading a business for 13 years. Not perfectly, not without mistakes. But if I spent all my time waiting to feel ready, then the negative voice wins. I sit quietly on the sidelines. Instead, I keep moving. I keep walking into rooms where I stand out. I keep decorating case and inventing new programs and processes and dreaming big dreams. And eventually the resume is louder than the negative voices." For you guys, I'm sure, especially first starting, that imposter syndrome is very loud. And with every new process that you don't understand, it gets another opportunity to speak. What did you guys do to overcome imposter syndrome and create brands that are memorable and beloved today?
Yeah, I think that the only thing that I found that helps with imposter syndrome is movement. You know, like if you just keep doing it, if you keep learning it, if you keep showing up like that, at some point, then you are the thing that your brain is telling you that you are. And so it's hard to argue with what your clock is telling you. I'll table, like, I am a coffee professional because I have been professionally making coffee all day. And so I think for somebody that started as a baker and who has been working to continue to learn the coffee industry, it's easy to feel less than in those rooms. And then someday you look up and you realize like you've been Mr. Miyagi along the way, and you're like, oh, I know things. Like I have been showing up. I've been doing this. I'm like growing my business muscles along the way. And so
Something I love is that the coffee community, especially in Omaha, is actually pretty close-knit. You know, we have different groups and things where we can kind of go to and ask questions and, you know, get some advice if needed. You know, for me, going into coffee, I was definitely a little intimidated. And, you know, there were so many people who were so much further ahead of me, but now being in it for so long, there's quite a few people who are kind of where I was and asking those same questions. And I think it's cool because there's just something always to be learned. And there's a lot of great people here who will provide post answers if you need them. That really helped a lot. Just, you know, a lot of the events and things that we all do together, getting to know each other, just knowing that you have others who support you and are kind of doing the same thing and care about those same things is valuable as well.
For me, it's like, you just stop trying to think about it. Alex Ald, he's the one that did the documentary Free Soloed El Cap and Yosemite, and they asked him about fear, like, you know, like, you're really scared, and he's like, well, yeah, I feel fear, but what good does it do to think about it, you know? And like, for me, I think this goes for like anyone wanting to do anything in life. It's like, fear will always be there, and if you want to engage it, then it's gonna freeze you up, you know, it's gonna lock you up. You will not take those steps. So like, any meeting that I said like in the beginning, like negotiating a lease, I needed nothing. I was ignorant, so ignorant. Now I would sit in these meetings and like I was just like writing down acronyms of people like P&L and RFI, and like, and I was literally just like writing down, and then I would go out to the car, get on my phone, and just like Google that stuff, and I was just like, oh, okay, and then connect the dots, you know. I mean, but like for me, it was like that's how I learned, was just like trial by fire. Like eventually, it's like you're gonna pursue your dreams and pursue, you know, the goals that you set forth, or you're just gonna fall in line like everyone else and just not, you know, wake up every morning to like, man, what if I would have done this? And I still, for me, at the end of life, I still am like, wake up and be like, crap, man, I should have. What if I would have done this? What if I would have done that? And you know, so no matter how young or old you are, it's like
fear will always be there. It doesn't matter who you are. It's like, are you going to give into that, or are you just going to take those steps? And so for me, I'm really just like shut that side of my brain off and just keep learning and falling down, getting up, and dusting myself off, and keep at it.
And I would add to that, just to surround yourself with people that can remind you of why you started, and to remind you of what you're good at, and to remind you of those things that are working well when you don't feel it anymore. And so I think anybody that does anything for any amount of time, you're going to have ebbs and flows of anxiety and fear along the way. And so to continue to show up to your team and to trust them even when you don't completely trust yourself, I think that's good.
Okay. From something very deep and knowledgeable, I learned something. I'm not going to get any fear. Thanks. A couple quick hitters before we get out of here. So, 15 seconds or less. What is your go-to coffee order, and what do you think it says about you?
I start every day with black coffee. I dip my single origin every time I lay the simple base of life.
I do like cold foam shots, a little cocoa.
Yes, I say about you.
Oh, good time.
And not shouldn't be Abby's best friend. That's what it says about me. I did black coffee. I guess same. Yes, a hand grinder. I made a pour over almost every day.
I drink a pour over every morning. Americanos throughout the day. All I'm thinking is basic. I'm really not though. But I just kind of to the point. I usually drink a Guatemalan, which I love. It's nice and smooth.
Hot or cold coffee? That was a piece. Best coffee city in America?
Omaha, Nebraska.
You guys have these are beyond quick hitters. Quick hitters. Weirdest coffee order you've ever received?
Oh. One day, we were at the mall. Do you remember when I said that location didn't work yesterday? Street man walks up and he says, I would like a banana chai. And we said, oh, we don't have that. But he would like to have a banana. Because then we have bananas right there. He had our speaker, he used to mash up a banana, pour hot chai over the top of it, and then with a straight face, he took a drink of it. And he said, that is the best banana chai. But
We had a person that wanted a matcha, half chai, and a shot of espresso in it. And I don't know. And my barista's looking at me what are you doing? It's just me. I don't care. If they want to, you can come at Archetype or whatever you want. If we can do it, we'll do it. It doesn't bother me, Yeah, exactly. We should throw it ahead in it. Well, I called it a swamp monster.
Our question was always, have you tried that before?
Sorry, first go. Please up.
I want to cheese on my it's so bad.
You have a guy who comes in weekly, and he gets matcha with 4 shots, extra 4 shots, 8 total, with Lotus energy added to it. You should take a natural energy. And I've responded to him because he does an online order, and I'm sure you want that. Easy. Yes, I ordered every week. We joke about how he needs to sign a waiver, just how much as you miss him.
I want to know what you're going to scratch out. Is he the one climbing the mountain?
Well, that was kind of a silly way to end the podcast, but seriously, I've learned so much tonight, and we got to 40% of my questions. I would love to just keep doing this and keep doing this. You guys are just a wealth of knowledge, and I thank you so much, just not only for tonight, but for, double-digit years of hard work, of opening different locations. Now you're having to deal with a whole new challenge with these tariffs and everything. Just thank you for just sticking with it, for overcoming the imposter syndrome, and for building just awesome brands that get to show us that McDonald's coffee is not the greatest coffee that thing is. So thank you very much for taking the time tonight and doing the live podcast, guys. This is for having Abby McLeay. Thanks for all this song. Omaha, as always, thanks for eating with us.